Sunday afternoon, and it's quite a nice day after a long time. And we have actually had lots of bookings. That's why we were just waiting. And the time changed, and so maybe some people have become a bit confused about the change of time. So I do apologize for starting late. My name is Muhammad Ahmedullah. I'm the secretary of Bricklane Circle. I won't say much about Bricklane Circle, except one or two things. Because there's lots of information on our website, which is bricklancircle.org. But I will just say one more thing before I pass on to Yasmin and introduce Yasmin. Bricklane Circle, we have been organizing seminars and conferences and events. Our main aim is to do something different. Because in the past, we have lots of politically oriented or religiously oriented meetings and events where people from one group normally go to their own meetings and then they reinforce each other's prejudices and views and opinions about others. And we don't get enough opportunity for coming together from different backgrounds and engage with each other and achieve cross-fertilization. So you have BNP, Jamaat, Awami League, and they do their own thing, and you don't get enough opportunity for people to debate and discuss. And we really believe that you need to get people from different backgrounds to come and talk to each other, to understand each other, and also then people will start moderating their own position because they will know that evils that they thought the others they will realize that it's not exactly true. So you need a process of discussion dialogue. And what we also do, we try to encourage people to be critical, to use information, facts and figures, and be logical. Use rules of logic to engage and improve their knowledge base and so on. Today is a very special day. Good and bad reason. One bad reason was because today the military dictator, General Yahya Khan, he launched an attack in Bangladesh to stop the election result from being implemented, and that caused a nightmare, and we know what happened. But we're not going to go into and discuss the war, what happened, and so on. Myself, we're lucky that Yasmin has agreed to come and speak to us. I wrote to her several months ago. After I read about her book, I also read an article which I circulated to everybody. And we thought that her research deals with fresh areas and fresh thinking, and that's what we need to encourage and inspire more people to look at what happened, history, with fresh eyes, with new research, discover new things, and try and use imagination to try and make better sense of what happened and find better political solutions to all the issues and problems that usually result from conflict and so on. Now I think most people have read maybe who Yasmin Saikia is, so I won't say much. I'll just read out a little bit of what we circulated, then I'll pass on to Yasmin, and then she'll speak for about maybe 30 minutes or so, about 40 minutes, and we'll have questions and answers. Well, Yasmin is a professor of history and the first holder of the Hardt-Nickachos Chair in Peace Studies at Arizona State University. She's originally from India and educated early in Aligarh Muslim University and then completed PhD and graduate studies in America. And she's going to speak on thinking about peace, oral history and testimony after the 1971 war for Bangladesh.
Okay. In a short but provocative article, Not Home in Empire, Ronajit Guha raises a fundamental question on the dilemma of freedom and its possibility in colonial India by reading the story of George Orwell's Shooting an Elephant. Guha asserts that unfreedom based on anxiety informed Orwell's behavior as a colonial officer who felt compelled by the expectations of his Burmese audience to shoot and kill an elephant that had run amok. In a fleeting instance, Orwell realized the possibility to unfetter from the institution that dehumanized him and act as a man capable of making his own decisions to refuse to kill the elephant. But Orwell failed to actualize that realization. The business of colonialism and the exercise of power beleaguered and trapped both the colonizer and the colonized. Agency remained moot. Taking this as my entry point to reflect on the dilemma of choice and the struggle for freedom that lies beyond entrapped institutional positionings, in this paper I critically investigate the established narratives of the 1971 War of Bangladesh and explore the potential of retelling a radically different story based on survivors' memories from Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India. The story of 1971 being an ongoing and unfolding narrative, unlike the closed narrative of Orwell's experience, allows me to search and share a possible space of freedom on the platform of humanity, Insāniyat in Urdu, or Manobikota in Bengali. Like Orwell, the survivors of 1971 ask, will we seize the opportunity to act as free agents by recognizing our humanity and write a new narrative after the war? Can the people's narrative break the cycle of hate that is produced and deployed by those in power who continue to divide us using the powerful rhetoric of nationalism and national identity? These questions of survivors allows a unique and humanistic text to emerge, shifting the focus from external institution and state actors to the internal domain of people's memories preserved by individuals. The humanistic narrative of survivors is at the heart of my paper. Survivors' narrative produce a kinder, gentler story, to borrow Abdullahi al-Naim's words, opening a space of freedom and a holistic subcontinental imagination to emerge after violence. My presentation is divided into two sections. In the first section, I explore the story of the history of the transformation of mentality within Pakistan, focusing particularly on the side of official history. Pakistan, that was originally conceived as a common homeland for a variety of Muslims of the subcontinent, soon after its foundation in 1947, assumed a new identity, privileging in association with the people and culture of West Pakistan, particularly with the dominant Punjabi groups. Concomitantly, the people and place of East Pakistan and the Bengali culture were reduced to not being sufficiently Pakistani. In the history textbooks written between 1956 to 1970, Bengalis were represented as recalcitrant. The need to discipline and train them to become obedient to the West Pakistani administration became a project. The failure of this project, I argue, subsequently shaped the image of Bengalis as strangers, Ajnabi, who were deemed enemy, dushman, of Muslim Pakistan. The Bengalis reacted to neglect and discrimination by organizing themselves into political groups demanding more power and better distribution of the economic resources, leading to a mass protest and secessionist movement that was supported and abated by India, Pakistan's arch rival. Finally, in war and extreme violence, Pakistan broke up on December 16, 1971, and a new nation-state of Bangladesh was founded in erstwhile East Pakistan. Soon after the violence of the war, survivors, both men and women of Pakistan and Bangladesh, tried to grapple with the troubled memories to make sense of the losses that they suffered. For survivors, it is the loss of their humanity that is centered in the testimonial evidences that I collected through oral history in Bangladesh and Pakistan. Rethinking Insāniyat, or Manobikota, they suggest a critical way of empowering post-conflict societies to function humanely and develop civic responsibilities. In the first section, I engage the story of the official history that circulates in history textbooks and the public domain of Pakistan and counter it with the private voice of Insāniyat that offers a new alternative memory emerging from survivors' experiences. In the second section of this paper, drawing upon individual perpetrators' regained humanistic perspective for redressing the violent past, I highlight the principle of Tawbah, or repentance, that gestures towards perpetrators seeking victims' forgiveness. This is based on a fundamental and extremely significant concept of Islamic justice called Huquq-ul-Insan, or rights of humans, which, if it can be utilized, allows for rethinking a process of reconciliation 4 decades after the war. To understand this concept of Insāniyat and Huquq-ul-Insan, a slight detour here is essential. In the Islamic tradition, humankind, or insan, is considered to be the best of God's creation and is thus seen as a trustee of the divine. Man, to be human, must journey and quest for evolution by making rational choices and choosing to do well by others. Enjoining good and avoiding evil is a cornerstone of this process according to the Quran. Human, or insan, however, is also blighted by forgetfulness, and thus there is a constant need to reaffirm one's human status by doing good deeds and seeking guidance to stay on course. Humanity is thus both a condition and an ethical position in Islam. Huquq-ul-Insan, which is the plural of haq, are rights endowed to people by virtue of their existence. It is not compromisable and is inherent in every person, Muslim or non-Muslim, according to the Islamic perspective. Enjoyment of this right, however, comes with duty towards others. Thus, in order to enjoy this right, one must show responsibility to others, the failure of which requires redressing for the reinstatement of rights that were transgressed. According to survivors, the rights of people were frequently undermined during the war, and so now there is a need to reinsert them for proper functioning of human society. The responsibility to make this requires individual involvement, without which their humanity would remain unreconstituted. The recognition of survivors, particularly perpetrators' understanding of the loss of the human status as insan due to the violence they committed, is a very powerful statement that heralds a beginning process for seeking and working toward justice. The actualization of this process for justice may be utopic, and it may remain confined to the level of a desire rather than be transformed into reality. The impediments in both Bangladesh and Pakistan are far too many, particularly in today's hyper-nationalism. There is no place for human conversations across the borders. But the need to imagine this possibility is a driving force, and it rehumanizes survivors, enabling a new and hopeful narrative to surface, at least in the private domain of people's lives. I privilege this text of memories because it moves us towards a people's ethics and lets us see self in others. The imagined humanity can play a crucial role toward delivering justice for freedom in the subcontinent. Having given this background, I want to start by thinking of the category called stranger to open a historical conversation of the process that ultimately led to violence against enemy groups, the Bengalis in particular, in the War of 1971. Frank Rosenthal, who has done an extremely interesting study of the etymological and historical evolution of the term stranger in Islam, probes two commonly used words for strangers, gharib and ajnabi. He shifts through literary and religious texts of Islam to identify the origin and meanings. According to Rosenthal, the word gharib, which has its root in Semitic language, where it is used to refer to a process of entering, like an intrusion, and thus not welcome, is absent in the Islamic Quranic tradition. But it is not an uncommon concept to tribal members of the Arabian society who pondered on this concern of stranger as an intruder in the literary ruminations. The term ajnabi, on the other hand, is mentioned once in Surah 4, Al-Nisa, the women, in verse 36, where it enumerates different classes of people that are to be treated with kindness and concern. The ajnabi within this group of people are considered the near neighbors and neighbors far away. There has been a lot of discussion on both these categories, but suffice to say here, strangers were not deemed intruders. But as Islam spread and mobility produced the byproduct of stranger, al-gharib, the old and non-Quranic word known to tribal Arabs started to make appearance in literature. Rosenthal suggests that the term ajnabi, however, became well suited to express the modern restriction of stranger to foreigner with a specific meaning of belonging to a different nationality. But the connotation of foreigner or other, developed in the English from alien, continue to be absent from either Arabic words gharib and ajnabi, even with the development of the appearance of new people within Islamic host societies. The Islamic literature, both in Arabic and Persian, particularly the adab literature, discusses a stranger in great details and reflects on this category of people as one who are bereft of love and home. Since all matters human have positive as well as negative side, that was extended to cover the stranger. In Sufi literature, the stranger is a category that's actually desirable because of the prophetic saying that one should live in the world as if one is a stranger. Thus, in the world of Islam, where everybody is supposed to be a stranger, nobody was a stranger. But how widely this feeling spread in society, of course, cannot be measured. The actual situation was obviously different from the ideal one. The rapid expansion and transformation of Muslim polity challenged the ideal concept of the community of believers from a collective to several disparate bodies divided in ethnic, national, and cultural boundaries. Suddenly, in the medieval and later Muslim polities, we encounter strangers as an enemy body who are perceived to be spies and interlopers and thus isolated for punishment to reduce the damaging influences on the host communities. The conflict between religious teaching to create a collective body of humanity based on the inclusion of all people, neighbors near and far away, and the reality of political situations that produce the category of stranger who are feared and made undesirable is one of the many contradictions that shape political Islam worldwide in modern times. The stranger as enemy in post-colonial Muslim Pakistan requires careful examination to understand the violence of 71. Xenophobia produces disturbing outcomes, and in Pakistan's case, this comes to mind in considering the situation and treatment of the people who are perceived as strangers within the national body. The stigmatized and enemy body of the Bengali strangers became a site for punishment according to the Pakistani establishment. What is the historical development of this construction? To engage this issue, we need to scrutinize the state-written history where we see the development and production of a stranger as the enemy within Pakistan. In 1958, when Ayub Khan assumed the position of President of Pakistan, it was at its lowest point. In an effort to gain legitimacy for his administration, one of the first tasks Ayub Khan undertook was to teach the diverse groups that made up the Pakistani people the ideal of Pakistani Islamic nationalism because, quote, the only thing on which Pakistanis are all united was the fear of Hindu domination, unquote, he claimed. Having established a common ground for Pakistan to be a unified nation, he identified the army as the true protectors of Islam and nation. The Pakistani people and the soldiers were encouraged to imagine themselves as the progeny of successful and fierce military heroes from Central Asia and the Arabian Peninsula, and they were set in sharp contrast to the Indian Hindus, who were represented as Baniya and sedentary peasants. A document called Pakistani Nationalism was created by the orders of Ayub Khan to serve as a blueprint for Pakistan's Islamizing mission. The document asserted that, quote, amongst the first settlers were the Arabs who came with trade convoys and with the armies of Muhammad bin Qasim and found a footing in Sindh. The impress of the stay of these Arabs can still be recognized within the modern day Pakistan, unquote, it declared. The simplified and selective narrative created by government order erased and deleted the rich and variegated Muslim past of the subcontinent, and in its place it inserted a made-up story of West Pakistani roots in Arabia to claim power through association with some of the founding clans of Islam and declare the West Pakistanis purer and better than the rest. The contrived Arabic past notwithstanding, the Pakistani military also needed its legacy from the Mughal dynasty that had succeeded in the Gangetic Valley of India. In the same document called the Pakistani Nationalism, the government declared that Pakistan's legacy owed to the quote, the Mughals, who for the first time provided the subcontinent with a tangible concept of nation and nationalism, unquote. It reminded the people that, quote, not only had the Muslims been the rulers and the Hindus the rule, but they were diametrically opposed to each other in the social, moral, religious, and national values and sentiments, unquote. The Hindu communities, where the subjects of the Muslim rulers were represented as ungrateful and conniving, and it was the intransience that led Qaeda Azim Muhammad Ali Jinnah to found Pakistan for Muslims to escape the tyranny of the Hindus. The government document called Pakistani Nationalism injected a foreboding sense of fear into the nation, reminding the people that Pakistan cannot rest easy because it is written with enemies. The group within Pakistan that was suspected the most naturally was the Bengalis. Their language was viewed as more Hindu-like, with many Sanskrit-derived words. Their foods and clothes were declared as not truly Islamic, and the people were considered, quote, susceptible to tremendous influence from West Bengal in India. They reported to have strong communist inclinations, and a warning was issued that the slightest encouragement will give the Bengalis the opportunities that they have been so ardently waiting to break away from Pakistan, unquote. It was accepted at the official level that the enemy had to be tamed and its will broken to safeguard Pakistan. This objective required the Islamizing of the Bengalis by changing public understanding of the past and creating a new historical memory, reminding them, quote, of the great privations that they had undergone at the hands of the Hindus over a long period of their history, unquote. The rewriting of the history of East Pakistan and Muslim history was a directive that came from the highest authorities from Ayub Khan in 1965 for East Pakistan. In rural areas and primary school level education, the government encouraged the appointment of ulama to teach Islamic subjects and ideals in the children and discouraged the appointment of Bengali Hindu teachers. Although the Bengali language was ultimately recognized officially, the effort of the state was to remake the Bengalis into Urdu speakers by providing special incentives and access to employment in civil and military institutions, scholarship for students, and so on. The military's grand scheme of Islamizing Pakistan and reducing the Bengalis to debased, Hindu-like people or enemies of Pakistan fanned the flames of Bengali nationalism and provoked multiple political interests throughout East Pakistan in the 1960s. In an attempt to give Pakistan a new lease on life, Yahya Khan, the new president and martial law administrator, having ousted Ayub Khan in 1969, held general election in November 1970. The outcome of the elections, as we all know, was unexpected. The victory of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the leader of the Awami League Party of East Pakistan, against his rival Zulfikar Ali Bhutto of the Pakistan People's Party of West Pakistan, proved disastrous for the military's plot. Failing to reach consensus, Yahya Khan, we know, also deployed the army on 25th of March 1971. Added to the belligerence of the Pakistan army, the steady and intrusive incursion of the Indian security forces and the covert work of Indian spies and instigators inside East Pakistan worsened the situation for the people there. For 9 months thereafter, until December 16, 1971, several wars were waged in East Pakistan. One was a civil war between East and West Pakistan. Another was an international war between India and Pakistan. The third was an ethnic war between the nationalist Bengalis and Urdu-speaking so-called Bihari communities. And the fourth was a most invisible but disastrous gender war, the worst in 20th century history. In the wars, the multiple state-formed armed forces and militias caused havoc within enemy communities, targeting the most vulnerable, women and children. Linguistically and historically, from 1947 to 71 thus, there was a metamorphosis and shifting change of who is a Pakistani within Pakistan. The creation of West Pakistan as core concomitantly reduced East Pakistan into periphery, and the Bengali people morphed into the status of outsiders, aliens, Hindu-like, and ultimately became strangers in their own land. They were the Ajnabi within, the Bengali Ajnabi within Pakistan, contrary to the Islamic injunction to treat this category of people with kindness, were seen as people who had forced their way into Pakistan and were claiming state power, which was an act of extreme defiance of their status, and the intention was suspect as an enemy plot. The enemy, or Dushman, as they were referred to in the military's instructive training program, deserved no consideration and goodwill. In Muslim Pakistan, Ajnabi or Dushman were also imagined as Fasadi, rebels, whose sole aim was to destroy Pakistan, and this image was circulated by the military and politicians like Bhutto, and it received wide public acceptance. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and his party's unwillingness to concede to military's machinations to relinquish their demands to form government was represented by the Pakistani military administration as Bagawat, revolt, and it had to be crushed with a heavy hand, they justified. Pakistan's action was thus inconsistent with its representation as an Islamic republic. A peculiar form of nationalism took shape, which is not part of the plot when Pakistan was founded, and of course it confused the people who became directly involved in crushing the revolt of the Fasadi Dushman. During my research in Bangladesh and Pakistan, I discussed with a variety of people the problem of otherizing a group of people as enemy of Pakistan. I had over 250 formal conversations and discussions with Bengali and Urdu-speaking women and collected nearly 150 perpetrators' testimonies from Pakistan and Bangladesh. This is not an exhaustive number, but my oral history research covered a very wide area throughout both the countries. Almost all the survivors with whom I spoke remorsefully recalled the loss of both religious and human values and the dehumanizing of people as enemies that allowed for justifying violence against them in consequence. It is not possible to recount the voices of these hundreds of people in this presentation and document the process and outcome of othering in which they participated and suffered during the war. Needless to say, the vast majority of survivors with whom I had interacted expressed a sincere need to close the wounds of 1971. I will examine in this section two short narratives as a way of introducing the process leading to creation of the enemy, the violence accompanying this construct, and the subsequent rethinking of the meaning of humanity by survivors. I think in the piece that you read, this story is part of that piece. Aparna, a survivor recounts. One afternoon, 5 men stormed into our house. I wish it was not 500. 5 men stormed into our house. They were from our neighborhood. Several Pakistani soldiers were also with them. All the male members in our family ran away. Only my 11-year-old brother was left behind. I tried to save my brother, but was apprehended by the attackers. After they finished their business, they set the house on fire and walked away. I helped my brother to escape, but I was badly burned in the process. That night, I hid in the backyard pond. Next morning, when I emerged from the pond in my shredded clothes and requested some men from our village who were returning from the morning prayers for help, they made funny noises and gestures and walked away. They treated me like I was a stranger. Since that day, I have been a living dead. Aparna's narrative is more than a story of rape, violence, and humiliation. It's also a telling story of the loss of self on many fronts, the personal sense of loss as well as the loss of others. The callous disregard between people affected everyday relationship, and East Pakistanis stopped seeing each other. The rhetoric of nationalism that encouraged forceful elimination of the enemy became paramount and physically realized. To this distance was added the brutality of the Pakistan army that deemed itself savior of Islam by terrorizing helpless and vulnerable people. There was no human face left in this debacle. Aparna, a young Hindu woman who suffered the horrors of the war in which she was not involved, becomes a gateway narrative to hear the stories of countless other women who suffered like her. Her story represents the inhumanity of our times and the cruel indifference of the winners of the war to accord a human life and dignity to victims thereafter. But victims are not stuck in hate, as many reminded me. They want recognition and regain their human dignity, which Aparna elucidates in her concluding remarks. One of my hands is paralyzed, but I can work with the other one. In the last 30 years, nobody has asked me how I was doing or what I want to do with my life, she lamented, and made me aware of the continuous violence that women have suffered during and after the war. A Bihari woman living in a camp for stateless people in Bangladesh summarized the condition of women in these words. Women are like cattle. We go wherever the men take us. No one asks us what we want. We want to have a human life too. Women need to work together to make peace, Bengali and Urdu-speaking women. We are all victims. Juxtaposed with the victim's narrative of dehumanization is a perpetrator's voice that interrogates the dehumanization and destruction of self in destroying the enemy. A Pakistani soldier, perpetrator, survivor, whatever you call him, recalled. I joined the forces because that was the only source of employment for us. In April 1971, I arrived in East Pakistan. We were told to teach the Bengalis a lesson. After a day of fighting, when I looked around, I saw the whole place was strewn with body parts. There were decapitated bodies, heads without bodies, dismembered arms and legs littered all over the place. Dogs were roaming about, dogs without any hair on them. They were feeding on human beings. Scores of vultures were descending too, and dogs and vultures were fighting over human body parts. I thought, he was a human being like me. Is this what a human being does to another human being? Insāniyat had died. Despite the struggle with his conscience, the soldier did not find the courage to question the institution and the orders that he received from his superior officers. He continued to fight and kill in the name of saving Pakistan because it meant his survival. It was after the war, when he was in a POW camp in India, that he was able to revisit the memories of violence in which he had participated. He recalled, there were 36 of us in my cell, but only 3 could swear that they had not committed unnecessary violence in the war. The word he used was had se bahar, beyond the limits, and hence the concept of Huquq-ul-Insan comes in very useful there. The rest of us were silent because we knew we had committed gunah, great sin. I took to reading the Quran during the 2 years of imprisonment in India. Then I became an insan, a human being. I repented for my sins and prayed for Allah's forgiveness. After 2 years, we were released from India and I returned to Pakistan. I continued to be poor, but I resigned from the army because I had found my Insāniyat. One may evaluate the Pakistan soldier's statement as a cop-out mechanism to come to terms with the past without having to deal with the victim's suffering. That would be a hasty conclusion. To understand what a soldier is conveying, one has to place it within the context of the Islamic concept of gunah, committed against another human being. It is considered to be the most heinous crime that even God cannot pardon unless the perpetrator is forgiven by the victim. The admission by the soldier perpetrator that his action in Bengal constituted gunah is significant because he takes responsibility and becomes aware that he has to bear the consequences in this life and in the hereafter. This realization does not come easy. His awareness of his fragile Insāniyat makes him even more vulnerable. He has to live with this knowledge, but in an indeterminate state, because his gunah and Insāniyat cannot be redeemed without his victims' forgiveness. In the present condition of nation-state politics in the subcontinent, the anguish of perpetrator survivors may not be resolvable. The narrative that I have quoted above is not unique to one individual in Pakistan. Leaving aside a small handful, almost all the perpetrators I interviewed express a deep sense of remorse and a need to redeem the past with its humanistic memories. Ikram Sehgal, a prominent businessman and a public intellectual in Pakistan today, if any one of you is from Pakistan, you very well know this character. In 1971, was a young captain in the Pakistan Army, serving in the 5th Bengal Division, which his father, Shan Sehgal, had commanded until 1967. He recalled that during the war he could not take sides because it was an intimate internal question for him. His parents hailed both from East and West Pakistan. His mother was a Bengali woman from Bogura in East Pakistan, and his father was a Punjabi from Sialkot in West Pakistan. Taking sides would have meant dividing his parents into two enemy figures. During the war, the Bengalis thought that he was a Pakistani agent and kidnapped him and turned him over to the Indian authorities. He was imprisoned in India in Tripura for several months until he escaped, only to be captured by the West Pakistanis, who considered his loyalty to Pakistan to be somewhat dubious. Ikram Sehgal was court-martialed and was ordered to be executed. But he was miraculously pardoned, he told me, which made him deeply conscious of the gift of a second life and need to work for improving relationship between the people of Pakistan and Bangladesh as a reflection of his parents' commitment to each other. Others, like Sahibzada Yaqub Khan, was the Eastern commander of the armed forces and resigned his position before the war in objection to the military solution, like his predecessor, Admiral Ehsan, who had also objected to the military takeover of East Pakistan. General Karar Ali Agha, he has since actually written a book after we had this conversation. Colonel Nader Ali, Planning Secretary Masood Mufti, businessman Muhammad Shafiq, General Zahid Zaman, Inspector General of Police Riyaz Sipra, businessman Syed Abu Nasir, Shamsuddin, a Jamaat-e-Islami worker, and many others that I had extensive discussions with focus on the importance of conscience, zamir, in choosing to question the violence during the war. How can we understand and reintegrate these voices within the narrative of 1971? Is it possible to accept perpetrators' agony and a subsequent rehumanization? How do we engage perpetrators' personal sense of victimhood alongside the victims, which are different, no doubt, but connected to the same event? Despite the gaps and problems of including within our frame of reference the victims and perpetrators' post-war traumas, it is crucial to bear in mind that both groups of survivors convey to us some very critical lessons. The combination of state-sanctioned violence coupled with established gender predisposition in a patriarchal society produced a bleak picture of the loss of human values and dignity. The human person became a blurry figure, too elusive for recognition. Immediately after the war, the traumatic memories of people were buried and a chorus of liberation emerged in Bangladesh, drowning the victims' narrative. In Pakistan too, the ignominious loss suffered in the war was immediately silenced and the POW became an unnecessary and residual collective whom the nation did not want to confront. In India, the triumphant narratives of the victory and cutting Pakistan down to size have dominated the national historical memory. The experience of the individual survivor was thus lost, the sufferings of a people as a whole was undermined, and the impersonal nation and state took precedence. Survivors, however, can no longer consent to the easy external national stories. They were there in the violence in East Pakistan in 1971, and they know the story from their intimate encounter. They also know the impact of his violence on them personally and his destructive reach far beyond the last shot of the battlefield was fired. Each one of them that I had the privilege to meet and listen to their memories continues to pursue the hard work of finding self in others. Only in accepting the wholeness of the other, they know they can begin to see what is within them, their humanity. This is the hardest and most difficult lesson of the war. This voice of humanity emerging from multiple individual locations exposes the loss of human dignity as a result of facile acceptance of nationalism. But it simultaneously authorizes a new space for experiencing freedom in the subcontinent. survivors return our gaze on the stranger not with venom and fear as an enemy, but with an illumination of a forgotten tradition, the vernacular of Insāniyat, Manavikata. This mystical gaze of humanity is the beginning of a redemptive possibility in Pakistan and Bangladesh, to which I turn to in the final section. In 1974, representatives on behalf of Bangladesh appealed to the International Court of Justice at The Hague to institute a War Criminals Tribunal, a WCT, to resolve the grievances of the victims of Bangladesh and punish the Pakistani perpetrators for their violence. The appeal was declined. A number of different reasons were given for this. One of the obvious reasons was the illegal use of 81,888 POWs imprisoned in the Indian camps, of which among them were 6,500 women and children. The protracted release of prisoners by India, particularly the continued incarceration of more than 4,000 children and infants, some as late as April 1974, was in contravention of the Geneva Convention. One of the demands of the Bangladeshi delegation was the punishment of Pakistanis for rape during the war. But in the 1970s, rape had not yet been declared as war crime and could be easily evaded by the court. The only opening for conversation was in medical terms about war babies and abortion, and that was not within the court's purview. 4 decades later, once again, a determined effort has been initiated by the Bangladeshi government to set up a commission to try the war criminals internally. Bangladeshis are hopeful that this time they will have the tribunal, and since it will be a national commission, they will have the power to identify and punish the perpetrators. But who will decide who the perpetrator is? In 2001, the published list in Bangladesh of war criminals contained the names of 195 Pakistanis. It quickly became apparent when I started research in Pakistan in 2004 that the list was of doubtful veracity. It contained names of soldiers and officers of the Pakistan Army and government who were captured and held as POW in India. Some of these captured men were latecomers in the war, and they had barely served for a few days. There were others who were intimately involved in the violence during the war, but had managed to leave the battlefield before the surrender of the Pakistani forces on December 16th. Although their colleagues and unit soldiers were incarcerated as POW in India, these men were now comfortably settled in Pakistan without anyone even doubting their role in the war. Obviously, the list that was compiled of the war criminals with the help of the Indian authorities who were controlling the POW camps had a huge problem of sloppy research. The vast majority of identified war criminals were subaltern soldiers who had merely obeyed commands and were not the leaders who had planned the violence. In Bangladesh, too, it appears that there were some questions raised about this list, and it was re-scrutinized. In 2008, a new and expanded list with more than 1,000 names of alleged perpetrators was drawn up for indictment and arrest. This new list identified the majority of perpetrators as Bengali Rajakars, Pakistani collaborators, who were loyal to the Jamaat-e-Islami party. To me, as a historian, this list appears somewhat unreliable. There is a curious highlighting of only one group as perpetrators. From oral history research, particularly based on women's evidence, I know that all groups of men were involved in violence. It was not the exclusive purview of the Jamaat supporters, as it is made out to be now in post-liberated Bangladesh. Also, the total absence of voices of women victims in the ongoing WCT in Bangladesh makes the effort highly questionable. The silence of women's voices, Bengali and non-Bengali, has disconnected women's experiences from its historical context, and once again, women's honor is used as a substitute for failing to recognize the brutality of rape. The hierarchy of men's truths and their demands for trial and women's silence and neglect persist. While violence in 1971 was certainly organized and executed by the armies of Pakistan and India, as well as the Bengali and Bihari militias, and they must be held accountable, it's also important to see the larger picture and address the relational arrangement between people that was destroyed in the violence. In listening to survivors' painful remembrances of personal memories, as I did in the course of my decade-long research, I learned from them that violence threatened the foundation of their humanity. The subsequent reflection on Insāniyat that emerged in the testimonial discourse of survivors allowed me to venture into a new exploration on the human capacity to rise above violence. Survivors suggested a language of rights and dignity inherent in a human person to reconvene a human collective. This powerful tool of humanism, evident and nurtured the site of lived culture in Pakistan and Bangladesh, serves as an emancipatory space for people to express their grievances and find closure for healing. It also democratizes the process and decenters power from the control of a select group of elites who have access to state authorities and its operations. One of the most important concerns for perpetrators is victims' forgiveness. Repentance or tawbah, they believe, is the way forward to seek victims' consideration. Tawbah opens the door for initiating a process of reconciliation between victims and perpetrators, and since it is derived from the grammar of religion, i.e. Islam, it is understandable as a concept to the grassroots Muslim populace of Bangladesh and Pakistan. Of course, it also complicates the situation because it introduces religious vocabulary to a process of reconciliation, making the majority Muslim community the primary agents for rethinking justice. The minorities, particularly the Hindus and Christians of Bangladesh and Pakistan, have to work within this concept. But repentance and forgiveness as concepts are not alien to either Hindus and Christian communities of the subcontinent. One may be curious, why turn to shared religious concept for reconciliation after violence? Here I am following the Gandhian outlook of using moral concepts to reach the grassroots communities of survivors and make politics of reconciliation a people's ethics, which is a counter to the elite state actors in state institutions orchestrating the phenomenon of justice because they cannot be trusted, having masterminded the violence the first time around. Thus, despite the inadequacies of the religious vocabulary of Tawbah, and given the stringent rules controlling the movement of people between Pakistan and Bangladesh and India, towards initiating a people-to-people dialogue, the realistic consideration of survivors that repentance and forgiveness should be given a chance is an initial step in the right direction, at least in my estimation. If it is carried out, it could potentially involve both the states and the publics of Pakistan and Bangladesh to address a long-neglected topic of violence in the war. Further, by privileging individuals to reflect on their role as perpetrators and address victim suffering, it empowers people, and simultaneously there is a move to indigenize the concept of human rights, which seem to be rejected by the Muslim states as a Western agenda rather than accepted as an internal priority. It is important to remember here that the admission of crime and doing tawbah is not yet a public discourse in Pakistan or Bangladesh, but it is a private voice. Who is the giver and trustee of rights is at the heart of the matter. Here I return to the concept of the rights or Huquq-ul-Insan that I addressed in the beginning of the paper. As mentioned earlier, Huquq-ul-Islam is a right endowed to people by virtue of their existence as human beings, and it cannot be compromised under any circumstance. In other words, the person is the autonomous recipient and owner of Huquq-ul-Insan. Unlike the Western concept of human rights that is associated with individuals, and the state is considered the protective mechanism to safeguard people against abuse, Huquq-ul-Insan emphasizes recognition of individual human dignity. It is not the same as human right and does not need the state to guarantee it. Each person is the autonomous owner and giver of this right. Thus, the exercise is a mutual process within a collective. Enjoyment of this right comes with an understanding of duty. Communities and individuals being in an interdependent relationship, the enjoyment of Huquq-ul-Insan is thus connected to their humanity. In the War of 1971, the dignity of human beings was superseded and annulled as man became indifferent to his human status and operated as an arm of the impersonal state and committed violence against non-combatant women who were dehumanized in the process. 40 years later, survivors who have taken the time to reflect on their actions are compelled to question the loss of Huquq-ul-Insan in violating their human dignity. They have to make the effort to regain it by acknowledging their crimes and seeking victims' forgiveness. Victims can exercise their right of Huquq-ul-Insan by refusing to forgive their perpetrators who transgressed their human dignity during the war. Thus, rights and responsibilities are combined, and for this practical application, it requires both parties to enter into a mutual understanding. Modern interpretation of the relationship between the Islamic idea of human rights have been explored by Abdullahi al-Naim, who is a legal scholar in Emory University, Abdul Karim Sarosh, who teaches at Harvard University, Ibrahim Musa, Duke University, Irene Ho, who teaches at American University in Washington, D.C., Abdul Aziz Sachedina, who teaches at the University of Virginia in America, to name a few. Fred Del Meyer, who is a philosopher and a Catholic thinker from Notre Dame University, finds that the interconnected relationship between religion and people provides a positive interplay, creating a concept of Islamic values, which he suggests can have a positive role in resolving human community issues. The exercise of Huquq-ul-Insan, which is based on free will of individuals, reaffirms the Quranic injunction to do good and avoid evil, which elevates humans to their true status. Encouraging victims to forgive the perpetrator, if possible, without losing sight of the crime that was committed, is similar to the Gandhian approach of condemning British colonial policies without blaming the English as a community of oppressors. Islamic restorative justice assumes that peace is possible after violence with a reciprocation of forgiveness, which is a victim's right to give or withhold. The victim's right to forgive the perpetrator allows for continuity of human societies, empowering it to move forward and away from excessive focus on the violence that is negative for human well-being. This shifts power from impersonal states like the state and government and offers an alternative vision for human development. In Pakistan, an effort was made by the Women's Action Forum to apologize on behalf of the nation to the women of Bangladesh for the crimes committed by the Pakistan Army. To my understanding, the gesture or the commendable cannot be a substitute. Perpetrators must apologize and seek victims' forgiveness personally. In the subcontinent as a whole, there has been no public acknowledgement of the crimes committed by the armed men against non-combatants in 1971. Unless we are willing to engage with the outcome of armed violence, there would be no movement in the direction of reconciliation and forgiveness by the people. Beyond the individual admitting to their crimes, the states of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh are ultimately responsible. They have led their armies on behalf of their national ambitions, and they must bear this responsibility. Thus, my suggestion is Huquq-ul-Insan cannot be reduced into a religious practice, but must be approached as a critical human language for an alternative discourse for justice in the present. In Pakistan and Bangladesh, the process relies on the moral force of rights that are inherent in the human condition, and the states of violation of the human right must be recognized for restoration by the state. It is not difficult to agree that the War of 1971 was one of the worst violations against humanity in the subcontinent. The event illuminates the traces of a frightful history that I outline in this presentation. We are afraid to look at it closely because it may mean seeing ourselves as both victims and perpetrators. Rather, we vent our anger at others and nurture the wound of suffering as a symbol of remembering. Without undermining the sacredness of that personal memory of victims, I would suggest that a story of victimhood must transcend the present impasse. The free and independent use of reason based on the ethics of humanity is a beginning step. Having worked with survivors of the war for several years and listening to the testimonial desire for justice, it is clear to me that the primary objective of regaining human dignity cannot be achieved without strengthening society in general and local culture of rights in particular. Clearly, there are no magic solutions that can materialize immediately and resolve the problems of the people. Therefore, my approach is to give priority to the internal cultural language of Huquq-ul-Insan that democratizes the process of seeking and granting forgiveness and leading to reconciliation. By devising local solutions that are incremental, one can address immediate short-term needs for moving beyond the trauma of violence while continuing to seek long-term ends to assure the violation of people's rights and dignities will not happen in future once again in the subcontinent. So this is what I had prepared to talk to you, and I now know you may have several questions, and I'm open to whatever you want to say.
I think what is right. Do you want to take this?
Yasmin, thank you very much. It was a very good presentation. Can you all hear me?
No, it's not turned on.
It's not?
Yeah, it's on. It's on.
It's on. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
You can? Yeah. Right. I have very small 3 questions. One is, can you define peace in 1 sentence? Second, nationalism, feeling of nationalism and rebelling against the authority, are they not 2 sides of the same coin? Somebody for his or her country is feeling that is nationalism. The other person who is ruling, that is going against. But they are the two sides of the same coin. And the third is, can the word humanity or humane behavior be implemented in a mass scale? Can it reach the word peace ultimately in today's world?
Okay, very, very big questions actually. They're not little questions. Peace in one sentence. To boil it down to one sentence, of course, requires a clarity that I don't have. Nonetheless, I would attempt to possibly say that peace is not the absence of violence. It requires a continuous. Peace does not come after violence. It is something that we have to nurture and be in it. It is an experiment that Gandhi had said. I really take on the Gandhian approach in this case. It's an experiment with yourself to find your own humanity. It's only then that you can understand the humanity of the other, which requires first to be. That means there's a difference between peace as an object and to be at peace with yourself. Right? So first you have to find the peace within yourself to be able to find the peace externally. And so it is not that absent the violence, the thing should be all wonderful outside and I can be tumultuous within. And that's a process. Nationalism and rebellion, are they the same thing? Nationalism, as far as I would understand historically, is a development of the 18th century. It is not that people did not rebel before the historical development of nationalism. So that rebellion is a demand for freedom, a demand for liberation, to find your human, to quest for a sense of justice that you set as your horizon in a very Derridean way. But nationalism is a construct, is an institutional build-up which had happened after the French Revolution. So I would not consider it to be the same. Rebelling to get the dignity driven by a nationalistic approach, yes, they may have the same continuum. But you can rebel even against God. Is that nationalism? You know, so rebellion as a concept is a much larger concept than the small construct called nationalism.
I would like to differ here because in our generation, what we personally saw, nationalism like Bangladeshis, they felt it was their nation, it was their country, so they rebelled. Because they felt unjust works or unjust politics was going on in the country. Their portion, their share, their ideas were getting ignored. So they rebelled. They rebelled against the authority who were imposing all these rules over them, and call these nationalistic feelings by the people of the soil, people who came from that soil, or people who actually accepted that soil as their own country, as the rebellion.
Right.
So they do come from which point you are looking at it.
No, I totally agree with you that the second part that you sort of said, that the perspective is different from that of the ruler versus the one who is asking for rights, for justice, for social justice, that West Pakistan government had completely denied. And I won't even call it rebellion, because in that case, that rebellion becomes, like particularly when you look at colonial records that I do, it is really amazing. The language of rebellion is always about the intransient, the problematic, the troublemaker. Here it is not a troublemaking, as you said, it is a demand for the right. A right to be absolutely a full participating member of the community that was brought together in 1947 and was called Pakistan, and it completely failed. That state completely failed its people. If you look at, it is not a failed state, it's a state that failed people. That's how I see it. If you read Canfield Smith's book, actually, that's an old book of 1957, and it's called Pakistan, a Muslim State, ? And he raises the question that, can Pakistan be ever a good state? And can it be a Muslim state? And it's that contradiction was really embedded within the quest for power and the claim that power must reproduce of authoritarian regimes that only crush the desire of the people that constituted this nation. So I totally agree with you. But I would not even use the word rebellion because it undermines that quest for justice. It's a larger concept than rebellion and nationalism. I find those things actually limit what are the issues that are at stake. And then you asked the question, can humanity reach, can be reached on a scale? I was thinking about it, I keep thinking about it, and one of my constant companions in this whole research, has been, I will admit, was Hazrat Nizamuddin Auliya and Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi. And I even did not write the book till I had the permission to write this book. And I was thinking about it this morning, and I actually want to read to you just one line of this. Last night, the Sheikh went out all about the city, lamp in hand, crying, I am weary of beast and devil, a man is my desire. They said, he is not to be found, we too have searched. He answered, he who is not to be found is my desire. So can it become a bad thing? No, it's still a desire.
I think it was to Mana.
Can we have a minute to change tape?
Oh, she didn't want to change. Rumana. You have to Rumana. I don't know if it's working. She's a loud voice.
I'm sorry, I really find it out. First of all, thank you very much. I mean, I actually went to say that I actually had read.
Oh, thank you.
And so I was curious to hear you here. Well, first of all, yes, the talk I really enjoyed. It's quite interesting, and I think I've got a whole lot of questions in mind which I'm not allowed to raise here in this small session.
You can.
Yeah, but I just asked a few questions. First of all, that as you have have focused on humanity when you were actually thinking about peace and reconciliation, and you said that humanity is the heart. I was wondering, just a slightly relevant question we have taken before that, how do we perceive humanity and which kind of framework we want to look at? For example, when you were talking about religion and people, I was wondering, I need to mention that I basically have sort of finished and submitted and had my Bible and a PhD called Gender and Armed Conflict. And I do teach in University of East London, and that's again gender, culture, religion, and all this stuff. So I was wondering if you are aware of this growing body of feminist literature which argues that there is an intersectionality between the axis, power axis, for example, gender, class, ethnicity, religion, and culture as well. And this, they hold, from Cynthia Enloy to Cynthia Hoffman to Nida Yufal-Davis and Nadia, all of them have argued that religion itself should be seen as a power X, because in certain situations, which you also have narrated in your book, that Pakistan, this West Pakistan government was employing religion as a power tool against these Pakistani people. So I was wondering then, how would Quran, or when you were referring to Surah 4, would have actually defined this kind of context? Because can humanity be achieved without understanding the politics of the power? That's one question. And the question B, if I'm allowed, is about the book actually, because I thought I got you here so I can ask you a question.
You can ask any question. There's no reason no rule.
It could be answered. I will try.
Okay.
Like
one?
Yes, please.
So it's basically, when I was reading your book, I actually have written my bibliography for my PhD, so I was lucky because it just came out a month before my submission. So I was looking at your explanation and narration of the war and the contextualization. So I'll just read a very short excerpt which I found here very briefly about the book. You said, the book started, today's talk and the book's narration and the contextualization of the world seem to be slightly different to me. Because in the book, you begin the book saying saying that the war was fought between India and Pakistan. You say fought between India and what was then East and West Pakistan. The war of 1971 led to the creation of Bangladesh, where it is remembered as the War of Liberation. For India, the war represents a triumphant settling of scores with Pakistan. If war is acknowledged in Pakistan, it is considered as an act of betrayal by the Bengalis. None of this nationalist history is conveyed the human cost of the war. Pakistani and Indian soldiers and Bengali militiamen tortured women as a mass escape. Basically, although it is a very short excerpt, but basically you have actually claimed a lot in it, I have to say. That you claim that the war was actually between India and what was then East and West Pakistan. Is that true? Because you are actually sort of mixing up, saying that the war was between India and East and West Pakistan. Wasn't it basically the war took between East Pakistan and West Pakistan, and India supporting and sort of like privileging and facilitating the war on East Pakistani side? B, the question, I felt like quite ignored because I'm from Bangladesh and my family had a very big history of war victimization and so on. And then I did the research, so I feel quite problematic in this particular point. And then B, I also found that you have actually sort of mixed up, and also what you did today as well, when you were talking about the crime and the rape by the soldiers and the militiamen, sort of like mixed up, because can we see the act of soldier through the same lens that we would see a militiaman do? And if we do, then how would we define it from a theoretical perspective? And then obviously I have a question here. It's just from curiosity, how many women did you interview in Bangladesh? Because then we would understand whether we could mix up militiamen's attitude and soldiers' act. And third was quite really problematic to me when you say that, if the war is acknowledged in Pakistan, it is cast as an act of betrayal by the Bengalis. So in your talk today, and also I have to say that inside the book, I have noticed several times that in several chapters you have noted very clearly articulated that it was not just a betrayal by the Bengalis, but it was an act of rebellion towards the state, politics of repression and suppression to the enemies. So, I'm not really sure.
Okay. Lots of very wonderful questions and great engagement with the issues and very kind of take on my position that, you're creating problems here. Why are you going to apologize that you are making all these assumptions? Let me take the very small question. The small question is, how many people did you interview? This was not based on interviews. This was based on multiple conversations. I lived in Bangladesh for 1 year in the first time around, and then around 3 months for the second time, and I've been going back every year to Bangladesh. In fact, showing the there's so much conversation and so much is unrecorded that I could not use it because it was not recorded. The ones that were recorded, I had over 253 recordings of these interviews. And I would say of those, around 50 of them are really connected to the issue of victims' rape, okay? So they are rape survivors. Others have talked about loss of, like as you said, very involved in the war, and have lost family members, sons, children, parents, whatever. It's a loss. It's an incredible loss. Now the smaller question that you ask, connected to that. So, how do women talk about it? It is in retrospectively that you can make these differences and say, oh, armed militia, different guys. Oh, the army, different guys. And as if the women who are getting raped are sitting and watching who's wearing what badge. There is no badge when men turn into criminals. Okay? And this kind of distinction to say that when Unfortunately, it doesn't matter what label you wear, whether you are a Punjabi or a Bengali or an Assamese or whoever you wear in that army, in the multiple armies and multiple armed militias that we are a part of, that involved in this heinous act of attacking women in their homes or in paddy fields or when they were going to schools and colleges, did not matter. Rape is rape. If you have met a person and if you have worked with a person who has suffered rape, it does not matter who did it. It is a complete disempowerment of a human being, and we need to acknowledge that and not make this difference and call it a theoretical argument. There is no theoretical argument when human beings destroy one another, particularly when men take the masculine pride to humiliate women through a power that they have. I will not make it a theoretical argument. For me, it's a humanistic concern, okay? And so I don't buy this feminist logic. I will not buy feminist logic that somehow feminism is going to stand up for women. Humanism and humans must stand up for one another. And in this case, I do not use labels of Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Indians, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, whatever they are. The fear that women have about even speaking about these issues, you can imagine the level of trauma. The trauma that has not yet been processed. Only the ones who have processed this trauma are able to talk about it. For most people, it has gone into a realm of a complete disjuncture. And the rupture is so real that you cannot. So when we look at issues like labeling and distinguishing and demarcating, maybe we need to ask ourselves, if I was in those shoes, would I want someone to just give me a label or give me justice? Okay, and I'm coming from that. And I completely agree with, I take your point of view. You're an academic, I'm an academic. We talk about these issues in classrooms, we write about it. But this book, this research completely transformed me from the academic that I was to an academic that's willing to be lambasted for speaking about things that have very little resonance in the abstract world of academic work. I'm no longer, what I'm trying to say is this theoretical abstract knowledge is not the altar in which I bow my head. I bow my head to the humanistic world that I have found in the subcontinent. And in doing this research, I have got I've developed incredible respect for the people I have met and have lost a lot of respect for governments and states that we all need for passports to move around. But the big question that you asked,
yes, but we're talking about peace, isn't it? Because today's talk is focused on rethinking peace. So when you talk about peace, don't we need to understand the policy? Because we know, I mean, in my research and also many other research before me, especially Insāniyat research and your work, it was clearly seen that the state of West Pakistan has chosen rape as one of their strategy to humiliate the enemies. So that was not only an act of humiliation to individuals, just to women, but also an act to delude and weaken the Bengalis, so that the rape by the soldiers was actually very premeditated, which Hardt-Nickachos work very clearly showed. She did a PhD on it, and it looked like that way. Soldiers were not, because they were Muslim soldiers, they did not always feel comfortable going to rape and mass rape unnecessarily if they are not really sexually motivated. But this was the strategy, because if you rape the woman and make forcefully pregnant, and then the woman will give a birth of a son or a daughter who will become a pure Muslim. That is what
I'm sorry, Romana, I don't know where people come up with this information. I do know Nayani has worked. Let me just, give me a little moment. I'm a historian, I do archival research, and I go deep into the archives. I'm not just talking to people and getting this information. No army, I have also done this with American soldiers. I've given a lot of talks in American, veterans, to American veterans. Almost all soldiers will tell you that rape is a war strategy. It is used over and over again. It did not just happen in 71. The only time rape got accepted as war crime is after the case of Bosnia. Before that, it was not declared as war crime. It is not a new thing, but there are no memos, there are no directives. This kind of stuff that people say was premeditated, it was directed, and people were sent out. This is not available, so we cannot make up stories, and we just can't say that this is exactly what happened and this is how they did it. That it happened because we have the victims, we have the survivors, we have the women who can tell us the story. We do know it happened. How it happened, what is the process of its happening, how is it a strategy that is so carefully manipulated, or is it something more than that, that armies work in a way to humiliate and transgress the rights of people who dare to question, is something that we need to make differences. We can't go from one to another and say this equals this and this equals this. It's bad research. And so we have to be very careful. We can't get into sloppy method, okay?
I don't think that it is important to look at.
We have to move on to somebody else.
No, it is very important. Okay, but the big question that Rumana raised actually is religion. That was the more important question. These things I think are controversial. They can be talked about, debated, changed, whatever. The question of religion that you're asking, and what is the feminist scholars who have been talking about religion, is another axis of power, and that needs to be discussed very carefully. But let's not forget that people do live with religion. Much as we may say in the academic world that religion is a problem, people worldwide do have a sense of whether they agree or disagree, there is some sense of being part of a community, of a religious community. Religion has been used by states and other groups of people over and over again, as I've also documented. The Pakistan state, Ayub Khan's period and others, have used religion in a way precisely to undo the values that religion is supposed to uphold. So I'm returning back to a people's ethics using religion. It is not moving towards religion. It is asking for a people's ethics that comes out of religion and guides you to a very different place from where the state wants to guide you. So it is not religion without power. It is giving religion its power coming from the people's understanding of what it should be.
No, we are running out of time. This gentleman is next.
Yeah, he was waiting for a long time.
As you talked about the reconciliation, so after 40 years of the war, at present the government plan to bring to the justice who committed the crimes. So how you think it is possible to reconcile? Because most of them are arrested, as we know from the newspaper, they are opposition. So how you think it could be reconciliation?
Good question. See, I'm not a very practical-minded person here. I'm not thinking how you can really go around doing it. And particularly given that so many people are, as you said, dead and gone, and also unwilling to do this kind of stuff. It requires a different kind of courage, honestly speaking, to even stand up and say, I committed a crime. I think I have gone to Pakistan since I've written this book, and I have given talks there, and it's amazing, the reception in Pakistan, where people do want to talk about it. Because when I had first gone there in 2004 and had spoken to graduate students, they did not even know that Bangladesh and East Pakistan are the same place. It has been so deleted and erased from their history books that students, PhD students doing history, had no idea that this was the same place. So now there is a need to reinsert that story and begin it very much there. The history curriculum has to change. It has to be able to talk about the past. Once you insert knowledge, questions emerge. And it's a process, again, like peace. It's a continuous process. And reconciliation is the goal to something that may happen, but may not happen. But once Pakistanis are able to admit that this was what their nation was about 40 years ago, we have an opening. That's all I can say. We don't have Desmond Tutu, and we do not have, you know.
Excuse me, really have to.
We can talk afterwards. Yeah, I'll have to.
Because we're running out of time. We've really
Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. I'm not sure how many questions the moderator will allow me to carry on. The first question I might ask, with regard to the reflections you mentioned about the victims, both Bengali and non-Bengali, and also the perpetrators, especially of those of Pakistanis. Madam, did you interview any perpetrators of Bengalis who raped or killed Biharis? And if so, what was their reflections, if you can kindly say so? The second question, if you...
One question, I'll just give you We'll talk after. Actually, the book would not have gone where it did. I would not have worked with perpetrators because that was not my original intention. If it was not for a Bengali man who first told me of his attempt to rape a young woman who was his neighbor, and the entire story, it was like a flashback moment by moment. How they entered the house, what they did, coming through skyline. It was such a traumatic story that it really made me think about what is the pain of men who commit violence too. If it was not for the Bengali interlocutor, I would not be doing the work. So that's where it started.
Yes, my name is Huquq-ul-Insan. I work for a television here. I would like to thank you for your presentation because that is a sort of challenge to the conventional historiography. And I'm a researcher at King's College London. I'm doing my PhD on war crime representation. Very small question. Based on your presentation, are you suggesting that the Pakistani, Indians, Bangladeshi or Biharis are equally responsible for the crime against humanity?
Okay, very, very good question. I don't think you can measure pain and you can measure culpability. You see the outcome, and the outcome is that you have left hundreds and thousands of people devastated, families destroyed, women's lives destroyed, men disappeared, whatever. So you now look at that question from the question of culpability and responsibility. It becomes true that the Pakistan state, and at that time, East Pakistan, West Pakistan was one Pakistan with a very different shell kind of So it is the state that's responsible. But do not forget, I think Rumana also had this thing about, were the Indians involved? And I think Rumana read this thing about betrayal as, I don't know how you read it. The word betrayal was used by the Pakistanis because they keep using the word as if, it was a brotherly feud, right? A family feud that had happened. So undermine the politics of it and make it look like it was something else. So the states of India and Pakistan, I would first say, are responsible because they allowed that hatred to surface to a point where everybody became just labels and categories, and these categories then could become dehumanized, and as I said, the human was lost. So finally, yes, the Bihar, like I had interviewed a lot of Biharis in Orangi in Karachi, and I had asked very clearly, what was it about the Bengalis that you did not like? You were living next door to them. They said, it was the Muslim League ka bhoot sawar tha. So how you manipulate minds, I think, is the most important thing. So going back to his original question, we need to have an education of who we are and what we can be. We have forgotten what we can be.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum. When I read the old paper, I was choking, and because you mentioned Rumi, I kind of understand where you're coming from, and I've got so many questions about your Aligarhian roots. Okay. I love your Islamic conceptualization of what's going on here, but I fear it'd be ignored or instrumentalized by our primitive secular intelligentsia. But I'm with you and I'd like to work with you practically on this. You speak about Huquq-ul-Islam, and I fear you try to shoe in human rights, which I kind of reject as epistemicidal. In the maqasid of the Sharia, the higher objectives of the Sharia, we have dignity as one of them. And let's work with that. But to not neglect, you didn't mention the law of qisas and retribution.
In my other work I have.
Oh, okay. I want to read that.
Yes.
If I was to establish a voluntary DNA database of all the soldiers and people around, then we could piece together some things if victims and war children came across. Is that something you could see happening?
In the future?
BRAC could sponsor it.
Some of you being, BRAC could sponsor it.
Yeah.
If people like you who are involved in academia and in politics in Bangladesh, I would highly recommend that the Projanmo society, the new generation, should be actually empowered. There are lots of organizations and associations, if you know, in Bangladesh.
But I feel that they're all really rubbish, and I was born here, right? I feel like a political orphan. I'm really disgusted with, we see some of the primitive reproduction of it here, and it was worse when Shamila Bose came. You should have seen what happened. And I love your approach and the spiritual approach. Can you perhaps convey something from our akhlaqi archive to help me with this moment?
That's why culture, the akhlaq and adab are very important. They're very great questions for I have to address Fuad's question if you don't mind, because we are in the same boat here. And just a quick thing for Fuad's sake. I have written about Qisas and Diya and all of that in other pieces. But I shoot in human rights not because I wanted, but here I'm not talking the Western human rights. I'm talking before you're a Bangladeshi, you're a Pakistani, you're an Indian, a Christian, you're a human.
Yeah.
And that human has that right? It is not this Western concept of human right. And that's when I'm using the term human right. I'll have to elaborate it when I really do it into a written paper. But that is the kind of human I'm talking about. The human who exists before we choose what labels we want to be. You are asking this question of besides akhlaq and adab kind of literature, practically speaking, going back to reconciliation, Iran has actually started this process of seeking forgiveness. There's a ministry of forgiveness that goes home to people after murder and any kind of thing and says, will you forgive? And there have been 2 cases that people have forgiven. And on forgiving, the family that is forgiven says that they have become free, they have felt unencumbered, that they have not taken the life of another person.
We're going to take 3 questions. We're really running out of time, and the guy just came in and showed me some signals, right?
Okay.
So, no, I think he wants to come in deep breath, then yourself, then this gentleman. I'm sorry if he doesn't have time.
And we'll take it maybe 2 or 3 together this time.
I'll be very short. I think for people like us from the subcontinent and what we've seen religion do, I think it is time that we moved away from relying on things like Huquq-ul-Insan and all this. And I think we should rely on humanity, that you mentioned. And we've seen the disaster that religion is causing in Pakistan. So for us to, a lot of young Muslims in this country feel that they rely on religion, particularly Islam, I'm surprised that you rely on that rather than the greater humanity, because in our context, religion has been, a disaster.
Just a follow-on from that. I think it's a question of identity, and I think you started off by talking about identity. And I think I just bring it back to 41 years from 1971. We're here 26 March tomorrow. Where are we? For the Bangladeshi diaspora or any other diaspora, where are we now? We keep on going back 41 years. That's fine. We need to know it. We need to understand it. We need to get the context of it. But we're not going forward. Call it religious, call it faith, call it whatever in the context, but we're not moving forward. And unless we start moving forward and creating our own identity and figure out who it is, and it's for each individual to figure it out. But we need to move forward and stop saying, this is what happened and that's where we are. And we seem to be stuck in the past like a broken record.
Just the last one from this gentleman. We have to stop it.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm going to ask a politically social sensitive question. I think it's been talked about everywhere, it's very relevant, and no one is actually asking it. We know the government has put a so-called international war crime tribunals. My question is, from your research, have you come across any evidence where we can say, I know you already indicated it's very difficult to put measure and quantify who's responsible and to what extent. But I was wondering whether you have come across any evidence from your interviews or any other sources, whether people who have been put in trial, specifically Jamaat Islamic leaders, such as Mukti-Bahini, the ex-leader, who's been also taken prison, Ghulam Azam. I will mention 2 sources that I've come across, which gives very contradictory sort of evidence. One of them was talking about Professor Aligarh Muslim. His book, The Vanguard of Islamic Revolution in Pakistan, which resulted from his PhD station at MIT. He states that Mukti-Bahini was leader in 71 of the student front of Jamaat at the time, which was Islamic. And he orchestrated and sort of encouraged and was responsible from Dhaka University to organize Aligarh and other paramilitary groups. Whereas Ghulam Azam, in his autobiography, he states an incident where he had a rape case and he immediately went to the Eastern Command of Pakistani Army based in Dhaka to inform them and to protest of what's been happening. So we have two contradictory kind of evidence from two very authoritative persons. So I was thinking, is there any other way we can ascertain to what extent, if you can quantify as such, the Jamaati leaders, especially the ones who've been accused, that they were responsible, especially for the atrocities. Even in some cases, people are saying they're also responsible for it. Or in the killing for that matter.
Here we go,
yeah, that's my point.
Okay, maybe all these three questions are interrelated actually, about using religion and this. As I said earlier, that my work has never been focused on issues of Islam. I had studied it for a long time, but had never really thought about it till I did these interviews. It is the people who use that language. I did not come up with these words. Tawbah and Gunah and all of these words are used by the perpetrators when they're thinking about what they had done. If they are using that lexicon and that vocabulary, I have to reinsert it into the text and then understand where they're coming from. They're not coming from some, let's get away with this problem of religion. Precisely they're saying it is religion, that the kind of religion that the state gave us, misguided us from the value of this religion that now I have to deal with because I'm dying. My Zameen. It was, the language is, the vocabulary is theirs. I am only giving it a framework now and saying this is perhaps where we can head if this makes sense to these people. Where we're moving forward is precisely that, taking that vocabulary, because they're asking that can we move forward? Is there a possibility not to keep harping on what we have done, rather what we can become, right? And do we become that kind of lesson or the bridge through which the people in future would know never to do this again, perhaps? So we need to give the voice. Finally, a question of Jamaat and the use of religion. You find the different contradictory. I have come across evidence that say both sides of it. Of Jamaat being actually the leaders, or not leaders, small workers of the Jamaat party, actually helping people who were to be women particularly, who were in very vulnerable position. So you get both sides of the story of being a concerned human being and sometimes using that as a religious foil and sometimes using religion precisely to say that this is, we did not know what was going on. At least they don't say we participated, but they would pretend that we did not know what was going on. As far as the WCT, it is not international. That is the problem. The whole problem with the WCT in Bangladesh is it's a national commission. And because a national commission, it has, in fact, lawyers after lawyers are writing and saying that this is not the way to do a WCT. It has to be done differently. And I'm sorry Bangladesh is not paying attention, so it's getting discredited. So evidence or no evidence is not going to make any matter.
Thank you very much. Excuse me, I can't. Romana, excuse me, you don't have time, sorry. Next time, we'll invite you next time. No, excuse me. No, you have to follow my rule. Thank you. We did give you enough time. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and I hope you found it very interesting. We just want to say one thing. Really sorry that we have to finish quickly, and people are really getting interested in this subject to explore and so on. We always look for speakers, who have done research, who have been developing new, fresh approaches and coming up with new ideas. So if you know people, who are doing research in different areas, not only to do with wars, but anything to do with Bangladesh, and Bangladesh is abroad, please pass them towards us, because we will continue to organize seminars and conferences for a long time to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you.